Hi, in this video we will take a look at some of the key new features and updates for Revit 2027 with a focus on structures. As with previous releases, the main drive is to improve structural analysis, concrete and steel workflows. Let's start by looking at the concrete modelling workflows. The first improvement you'll see here is to the user interface. We now have a dedicated tab for concrete modelling, consolidating the reinforcement and precast tools along with the settings in one simple tab. You can also see here two new icons, Path Freeform Rebar and Morphed Freeform Rebar. Morphed Rebar is an exciting new feature that enables the modelling of transverse rebar by simply selecting the rebar or rebar segments parallel to the view. In this example here, you can see that we have a staircase and we have the main rebars modelled, and we now want to create the transverse rebar. To do this, on the Concrete tab, we can select the new Morphed Rebar command. On the Context tab, we're going to have the distribution set to by rebar, and in this case here, I'm going to select bar segments. Looking into the Properties palette, we can see here that we have our layout rule and the spacing. So now we can simply go ahead and select a segment and control which side the rebars are populated on, and as we do this we can obviously see our rebars being created. To give us more control, we can actually do these in separate operations, like so. And then to make sure that these line up, we can actually select one of these rebar sets in here, and then we can just grip edit these as we see fit. And you can now see the transverse rebar modelled on the stair. Of course, the rebar remains parametric to its original host. So for example, if I select this main bar here, and I then drag this to grip edit it, we can see all of the rebar then follows that main reinforcement bar. So that's a very productive new tool for complex reinforcement. So let's now look at some additional use cases for Morphed Rebar on more standard objects. So you can see here that I have a circular column and a square column. And first thing we're going to do here is place in the links. So I'll start with the circular column. So I'll select it here, and we'll just use the normal rebar tool for this. In this case, we want to go and choose shapecode 77, which of course is spiral rebar. And we can then place that in, and that's now going to expand to the host, like so. I'll select the spiral rebar and I'll set the pitch here perhaps to 250. Okay, we'd also do the similar thing for the square column over here. So we'll go to rebar. Of course now the shape code wants to be perhaps something like 51, and we can see our placement orientation is already set to perpendicular to cover, so we can place in our first link. And of course here the layout rule doesn't want to be single, so I'll change this to maximum spacing, and in this case we'll set the spacing of 200. Okay, again I can set the rebar here, and we'll just change the bar size here to something a bit more sensible like H20. Okay, so now that rebar's modelled, we'll use our new Morphed Freeform Rebar to place the main reinforcement into these elements. So again here the distribution is set to by rebar. The target now is going to be the entire bar, and for the layout rule I'm going to start with a fixed number, and perhaps we'll have 12 reinforcement bars in our circular column. So all we need to do here is just go ahead and select the rebar, and straight away now we can see those reinforcements added in. Of course, if we just switch into a top view on here, we can now see all of those main reinforcements are added. The benefit with this, of course, is this is one rebar set, and of course when we tag this it will call off the correct quantity of rebars. Okay, great. So let's now have a look at what we can do with this square column. So it'll be a similar workflow. We'll select our Morphed Rebar. This time here I'm going to use the entire bar again, but the fixed number this time I'm going to set to 8. Now this is really clever what this does. You'll see that it distributes it in a certain way to make sure that there's rebars on each of the corners. So going in and inspecting this in plane, we can very clearly now see that the main rebars are in the corners of the links, and then it's distributed a separate one into the centre. So of course if I set this to 4 rebars in here, that's our result. Yep, if I go for something like 12, again you can see those results. So this is a really good way of modelling this main rebar. And of course, like everything else, this is completely parametric. So if I went back and changed the actual formwork here to something different, you can see the main rebar links have all updated, as well as all the main reinforcement in that column. So that's a really good use case for reinforcing typical structures. Whilst we're here, we'll also look at the concrete columns and beams, and we can now see that the structural properties, like things like moments of inertia, section modulus and so on, are automatically calculated from the member's cross-sectional shape. Now, in order to get this to work, you have to set a cross-sectional shape. So if I go and edit the family here on this rectangular column, if we go into the family category and parameters here, we can see that we've got the section shape already selected here. So this is rectangular. Of course, you can select any shape you want in here. And now going back into the project, if I select my column and then I go to edit type, you'll notice here we have enable auto calculation of values, and simply checking that, you can see now it populates all of those values automatically. As you would expect, you can use this for tagging and scheduling, and also this will be used for downstream analysis applications as well. Now, if you do want to override these, you can just uncheck that again, and of course then you can actually make any changes you want to these properties. So that's really quite useful. Again, while we're here, we'll notice now that when we select reinforcement, we have these read-only values now for reinforcement mass and reinforcement volume. So of course now we're calculating accurate weights for all these reinforcement elements, which means when we produce a bending schedule, we can get the total tonnage of steel directly from the model. The last reinforcement feature we'll take a look at here is going to be rebar sets driven by formulae. So if I select this rebar set here, we can see that we've traditionally got a layout rule, maximum spacing 250. What we can now do is use custom spacing, and you can then see that we get a layout formula field where we can enter in our formula for this. So type of thing we can do here is perhaps set out the links based on a percentage, or we can pre-describe how many links we want at what centres, and we can have as many ranges now as we want. So as an example, I might want to set 25% of my beam to have a spacing in here of 100. I'll separate that with a semicolon. Then I might want 50% of the beam, which would be the part in the middle, actually separate it here with 300 centres, and then we'll go back into the 25% at 100 spacing. Obviously now we can see all of those links have been distributed in one rebar set. Of course, what that means is when we come to tag it, we can now call off the number of links in each of these ranges within that rebar set. Of course, there's many different types of layout formulae we can use, and perhaps we'll look at those in a later video. Okay, let's now take a look at some analytical modelling improvements. And the first thing we might want to look at here is the splitting of analytical panels. Now, one of the workflows we have here is to create the analytical model directly from the physical model. And if the technician has modelled the slab as one piece, like this, for example, obviously that's what we will get when we convert the physical member into the analytical panel. So if I select split here, what I can then do is decide how I want to split the panel out. So what we can do is start to actually pick the grid lines, for example, and you can now see that panel is subdivided. Going again, I can now pick another grid line over here, and we can now see that we've got that panel split down. So that's an incredibly useful function. Of course, we've always been able to do that with the analytical members, but not actually with the panels themselves. We can also split them based on lines and other criteria. Another new function we have here is the ability to actually set the properties of a panel to be cladding. This is really useful when you want to apply things like wind load. So what I'm going to do here is select all of these panels that are representing the cladding. We'll filter this so we only get the panels selected. And in the properties palette now, we can go ahead and actually set a structural role for this. And you can now see we have cladding. Okay, obviously here I can set whether this is a one-way or two-way, so this is going to be two-way. And then we could put a load on this as well. So we could go into our Analyze tab, we could go ahead and select loads. And what I want to do here is put an area load on, and we want this to be hosted. Going here, we can go ahead and select all of our panels in one go, like so. And looking into the properties over here, we can set our loading up. So that's going to be 0.3 kilonewtons, like so. And of course, we can actually orientate that any way we want. In this case, I want that to be to the project. And you can now see all of those loads have been applied to those cladding panels. So now, just to summarise what we've seen in Revit 2027, you can see that we've got two priorities here, really. We're actually making Revit a really capable reinforcement platform, particularly when it comes to complex arrangements in civil structures such as bridges and tunnels. And also you can see here that we're laying down all of the foundations to have a full analytical toolset directly in Revit. The steel detailing remains a work in progress, but the editing improvements suggest that the platform is being prepared for a more significant update. Okay, I hope you found that useful. As you have seen from this video, most of the new features are around subjects such as concrete reinforcement and analytical modelling. If you are new to some of these subjects and would like to learn a bit more, why not join us for one of our training courses? For example, you could join us for reinforced concrete detailing for Revit. Here, you will learn all the processes to produce 3D rebar, details and the bending schedule. You can of course browse for other courses that we offer, or perhaps come and join us for a custom workshop. We look forward to seeing you soon.